I greet you in the spirit of the Lord Jesus Christ, and in the words of 1 Samuel 25:6, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Welcome back to the Health Renaissance channel. Thank you so much for joining us again today. We are continuing our discussion related to the social justice issues of today, around healthcare and the healthcare delivery system as a social justice issue specifically, and then the church and the church's role. And we started this conversation over the last couple of episodes, and we've had the benefit of the wisdom of the Reverend A. Casimir Brown. She is a graduate of University of California, Berkeley, with her master's in public policy, with a specialization in social policy, and she has her master's of divinity from Yale University. And so she is perfectly poised to speak on these issues and where that intersection is between social justice and the church. And so we've been having a really fruitful conversation over the past couple of episodes, and we continue that discussion, and we are focusing on what many may look to as being competing priorities. With so many disparities in so many areas of our daily lives, where do we focus our efforts? And I have been struggling through this, quite honestly. And so it was very good to have a conversation with someone whom I trust and someone who I find wise and studied. So enjoy this conversation on those issues. And it is my hope that you will find something informative and that you'll find something that feeds your spirit. At times such as these, I have a belief that there should be some consolidated efforts. And I know that you should work within your passion, you should work within the areas that you feel that you can be most impactful, and that God gives us all different gifts. But what I am struggling with, what I'm finding tension in is, do we rally together and place all of our efforts into going in one direction? And so I'm not picking on the environmentalists. It was just the first one that came to mind. But we know that there are, as you mentioned, there are a lot of different groups that have, varied purposes and missions, and visions for themselves and things that they want to reduce and, attentions they want to bring to their interests. But I'm just wondering, is this the time that we come out of our silos and we put together some consolidated efforts in all ways? And when I say this, I also want there to be an understanding that I'm also speaking to it from a biblical perspective, and that, when I'm thinking through it, the question is, kind of from a biblical perspective, is when we're looking at Genesis 1:26, and I think all the way through 30, and God creates humans and gives them dominion over all other creatures and green plants and fruit and grain. To me, my interpretation of this hermeneutic is that God wants our concern to first be for humankind. First. So my thought is, should we put our efforts towards saving the humans who are most at risk? And then when I say it, so I'm talking about efforts, I'm talking about resources, I'm talking about time. Is it fair to ask others to pause and or redirect efforts, time, and resources until what we need for humankind is achieved? Yeah, help me.
I mean, that is And I'll say, like, I'm thinking about the different points that you raised. One of which is our base theology when it comes to how we see our relationship with God, how we see our relationship with self, and how we see our relationship with others.
Yes.
And I think oftentimes the theology that has been passed down has been, when I say passed down, it's been passed down through a certain history. It
Yes.
has been stripped down of certain things. It has, yes, that's what I'll say. The
Yes.
theology has been passed down, has stripped us from, once again, seeing ourselves as being a part of a greater creation. And when we start looking at a theology that centers, even centers people first, some would say that that centering of people means a decentering of everything else. And just merely us centering one and decentering, putting everything else in the periphery, is not, and some people say is not actually, you know, it is a way that further perpetuates this idea of individualism, that this group is supposed to be the focus. This group is special. Everything else is just, you know, kind of secondary, that we'll get to. And I know there's a lot of things that people could say to that, but where I'm going with this is, I think oftentimes the language that is used in various issue areas is so siloed. Once again, it goes back to connecting it. It's so siloed that you start missing the different questions to ask. So when I think about the environmental, ecological devastation, and people will say, oh, there's many ways to address it, but it doesn't seem, and but other people say, but you're not addressing us. You're not addressing, you know, human needs.
Right,
and so, to me, a couple of things that's coming out of that is, one, the questions that we're asking of this problem is not encompassing enough of what's causing the issue.
Yeah.
And so when you look at environmental, ecological devastation, if you look at it from a people lens, then you see that there's people in this country unable to pay their water bill. That there's people in this country that do not have access to clean water. Flint. There's people, and I would say Flint is known, but I will say years even before I knew about Flint, I knew about in California, there was people in valleys that did not have clean water. I have been in households where I turn on the water and it is brown for a little bit before it gets clear. And so there is, and then even now in California, when we talk about ecological devastation, when you have smoke that impedes people's ability to leave their house for days.
Yeah.
Once again, those are ecological issues that are happening, the poisoning of water, the suffocation of our air. Yeah. But what it's framed as how it's impacting our everyday lives. And oftentimes the framing of it leaves groups of people, groups of creation out. So we believe that when we address a particular issue, it can only be addressed through a certain lens. It can only be addressed, if you're going to do ecological devastation, only care about the plants, only care about the animals, only care about the humans. And that is not the case. You will never address the issues if you only take the lens of a particular part of creation. And so for me, and it's challenging because it's not something that's always taught. It is not always something that is discussed. It is reimagining our theology that is truly inclusive of all. Yeah. Which also means that, and it is inclusive of all, but it also decenters certain communities, and if we need to center a particular community, that is centering is done to get what the needs are of that community. And then when we center another community of creation, then we center those needs, and then we add them to the very needs of the other community that we just centered. So once again, it is not a zero-sum game, which is another thing that a society is very prone to perpetuate, and it's something that then creeps into our theology, that only certain people are going to get blessings, and if you do certain things, then you will be rewarded in this regard. And so we see this, like, this creeping in into our theology, which then creeps into how we address social ills. When we start addressing social ills, is that we cannot what's the word? If we address social ills as that, and I would say, I would challenge language like, oh, this needs to be first, or this needs to be second.
Okay, fair.
Because I don't know, this phrase keeps on sticking in my head, is like, there is no high without a low.
Okay.
Which oftentimes when we look at something as being higher or coming first, the thing that comes second or the thing that's lower is often diminished. And I would challenge, what would it look like to put everything at first?
Yeah.
And I think that's it's hard for us to think about that, because we think about, oh, we don't have time for that. Like, how like, I won't have time to, focus on everything. And I think that's not the point for us to have an individual know everything. We're supposed to be in community with one another. So the things that you know are then going to be added to the things that the next person knows. And I think that when we have a passion and we hear about or we see another person's passion, or we have a calling towards addressing a certain social justice issue, and we see another person has that another passion to address another social justice issue, to me, what we can do to further one another's cause is not to be in competition, but to learn from, and not to see like, oh, I can't spare an hour doing this for you, or spare $5 here, but what can you spare? Instead of thinking that I can't help and I can't address and this is too much, well, what can you give? And sometimes all you can give might be, is an acknowledgement. Okay, this exists. This problem exists. And that and that could be the first step, but that's not the last step, folks. It is acknowledgement, and then it's finding ways for us to continuously find the threads that connect us back. And so, yeah, I guess I push back with this idea that we have to focus on systemic racism first, and then we can talk about the earth. No, it has to be the earth. And then poverty. No, it has to be, the war economy. And then they're not separate.
Yeah.
We're not separate. So to me, it's about putting all of them first and addressing. And I think once we have a language that weaves in and asking a question that takes different lenses, then it's harder for us to put one in front of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even when people are like, well, you have to focus on one thing. Well, why? Why? There's plenty of people. There's plenty of passions. And I will say, none of us are monolithic. None of us have one thing that we care about.
Yes.
One thing that makes up our being. We are composed of many things. Our geographies, our education. Yeah. And I also think that kind of ties into, if we think of ourselves as being embodiments of different aspects of ourselves, what would it mean to bring and I think oftentimes in a society we are forced into silos that we have to emphasize one part of our identity, one part of our being, or one type of our passion, because oftentimes we have a hard time dealing with, oh, you have multiple passions, oh, you're this and that,
right.
And I think that kind of goes into like, oh, there's multiple injustices that we have to address, this and that at the same time.
Yes. All at once. Yeah.
All at once. So I'm a big proponent of, I do think it's an all at once. And I do think it is possible. I do think it is possible. And I think it requires like a shifting of what we're used to. And it's probably what a lot of us have been taught.
So do you think that there is a possibility of bringing those groups together so that we're not putting our efforts in kind of siloed and disparate places?
Yeah, and there's obviously a discussion to be had about people having a sense of self and not feeling like, oh, I have to be everything to everybody, and that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about living in and working from a place of rootedness that acknowledges the things that you're passionate about and your capacity, and then joining that and also expanding that to link up and to bridge with other people who have their own individual passions and perspectives. Because to me, it's almost like, I think the imagery that comes to mind, it's like a piece of cloth. And a piece of cloth has many individual threads. Like when we touch a piece of cloth, we're like, oh, this is one piece. But we know that it's made up of individual strands that have been, shaped and molded and threaded closely together to come and make a solid piece. And that is what I believe has to happen now. We are supposed to be coming together as threads. And sometimes those threads are going to have a lot of different colors. They might be different materials, folks. Go with me with this metaphor. But they're coming together to make a foundation. And to me, that foundation is supposed to be one where we all are taken care of. Where our physical health, our spiritual health, our mental health is taken care of. And when I say ours, I'm talking about not just humanity, but as creation, we're taken care of. That we're taking care of the physical creation, the spiritual creation, the mental creation. And I do think it's possible, but it is going to require a major shift in how we, I think in a lot of things, in how we think about education and interact with the things that we're learning. I think it's going to take a major shift in how we interact with one another. I think it's going to take a major shift in the theologies that we hold, because oftentimes is this idea of this gets prioritized and this other stuff is not, or this is separate from that. This is sacred and this is secular. And and for me, it is bringing all of God's creation together. That is not an easy task, but I do believe that it is a possible task. And I mean, once again, being a believer of the seen and the unseen, and the believed and the unbelievable. I mean, I think that's part of my faith.
Yes. So it seems to me that, as we had discussed, there is a role for the church in all of this. And there's something to be done by the church, and even within the church, within the walls of the church, that can move us closer to our goals of eliminating these disparities across the board. And that will require, though, the leadership of these churches and of these denominations to kind of step up and do that. And I tend to believe that our leaders need to be an example of what we're trying to achieve. And so with that said, I really wanted to have some discussions around our church leadership, people in clergy, and health and wellness, and having self-care move up the priority list for a lot of our leaders in our churches. And, you know, clergy, regardless of denomination, you know, clergy are they're thought to be and expected to be to care for everyone else. And sometimes we forget ourselves, right? And so in that, and given your passion regarding wellness and health and holistic health, does it mean even more to have a focus of self-care? Does it mean even more being a member of the clergy? Has that even kind of emphasized, is it something you emphasize more with yourself, given all of the different ways that you now are being pulled as a member of the clergy?
Yeah, oh my goodness.